I didn't expect the Thanksgiving email to come from Araminta, not because she doesn't send emails. She does, mostly motivational nonsense and links to overpriced retreats, but because this was different. This wasn't a group chat message asking who's bringing what, or mom's usual guilt-laced reminder about how time is precious. No, this was a formal invitation. Subject line, Araminta's annual family feast. Beneath it, the address. My address. I read it twice. Blinked, then read it again. 3 days out from Thanksgiving, and somehow my house had become the venue for a dinner I hadn't agreed to host, announced by a sister who hadn't paid a dime toward the mortgage, let alone cleared it with me. I scrolled back through our family group chat, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. Nothing. The last message was from Dad, 3 weeks ago, sharing a picture of his new golf shoes. Before that, Mom's recipe for cranberry relish. Nothing about a change in plans. Nothing about Araminta hosting. I clicked open the invitation again, trying to catch my breath. It was neatly formatted, gold font, autumn leaves in the border. Clearly, she'd paid someone to design it. Come celebrate gratitude and legacy with us at our family home, it read. No mention that I lived there, no RSVP link, no hint that I might be anything more than the woman who opened the door. I set my phone down and stared at the wall. Don't overthink it, I muttered aloud. It's just a dinner. But it wasn't. The last time I'd been invited into something involving my name, I lost more than a weekend. I remembered the exact moment my parents asked me to help with the house. It was 8 years ago. Dad had pulled me aside during a family barbecue. Mom was inside, icing a cake that no one wanted. You've got the best credit score in the family, he'd said, like it was a compliment. And you're steady. Job, savings. Your sister's, well, not quite there yet. Mom had added, it's just paperwork, sweetheart. You'd be helping us keep the house in the family. So I signed. I signed because I believed them when they said it was temporary. I believed them when they promised I'd always have a say. I believed them when they said, we'll never forget this. Turns out, forgetting was their favorite trick. Since then, I'd paid the property taxes, insured the place, even replaced the entire roof after the winter storm of 21. I'd done it all quietly, because that's what responsible daughters do. And yet, somewhere along the line, the way they said, our house shifted. It used to include me. Then it didn't. Now, it belonged to Araminta, at least in the version of reality she was selling. The next morning, I drove past the house on my way back from the bank. I slowed as I approached and saw a delivery truck parked in the driveway. Men in black polos were unloading white folding chairs and stacks of floral centerpieces. Through the front window, I saw the dining table had already been extended. I pulled over. One of the workers smiled at me. You here for the event setup? I forced a polite nod. Just passing by? He shrugged. Big party. Legacy dinner, I think? Legacy. That word made my stomach turn. I rang the bell. Mom opened the door wearing an apron I didn't recognize. There was flour on her sleeve and a faint smell of cinnamon in the air. Familiar, comforting, manipulative. Oh, honey, she said, surprised but not exactly pleased. I thought you were working today. I was, I replied, stepping in. What's going on? She wiped her hands on her apron. Your sister's hosting this year. Isn't it lovely? She's taking charge, finally stepping into her role. I blinked. In my house. Her smile didn't budge. Well, you know she needed a space that felt welcoming. Welcoming, not hers. Not mine, just generic, like I was the Airbnb owner and she was the influencer with the better story. I nodded, just barely, and walked out. That evening, I called Araminta, straight to the point. Why did you list the dinner under your name? She didn't skip a beat. It's branding, Ayala, like a family tradition I'm starting. Branding? I asked. Relax, she said, light and cheerful. I made little menus, place cards. You'll love it. I picked your seat, right near the kitchen. You always like to help. I didn't respond. Not because I agreed, but because I knew that if I opened my mouth, something sharp would come out. I hung up and without even thinking, opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, Ways I've disappeared. The list grew quickly. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, facing the dim glow of my bedside lamp. The house was quiet, mine, technically, but feeling less so by the hour. "It's funny," I murmured to no one. "When you're useful, everyone wants a piece of you. When you stop moving, you're invisible." I'd read that somewhere, or maybe I just felt it. In America, we're raised to believe independence is sacred, but in families like mine, it's conditional. They love your strength as long as it serves them. The moment it resists, they call it coldness. I thought of a quote I'd saved on my phone. Maya Angelou. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." This dinner wasn't about gratitude, it was about display. The house, the story, the guest list, they weren't celebrating the family, they were staging it. A few minutes later, I got an email forward from Aunt Alara. It wasn't meant for me. Subject line, "Final Program, Araminta's Legacy Dinner." Attached was a PDF, gold lettering, fancy borders, a seating chart with names, a schedule, and a section called Tribute Segment. I searched for my name. Nothing, not even as a host. My jaw tensed. I turned off the lamp, but the glow in my mind didn't dim. This wasn't an oversight. It was a script, one I wasn't in. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the grocery store, phone balanced in one hand, coffee in the other, the PDF open again. The light turned green, but I didn't move. "You don't always know when you're being erased," I whispered, "until they write someone else into your place." And just like that, I knew. This Thanksgiving wouldn't be about turkey. It'd be about truth. I arrived 2 days early, just like I always had. Tradition wasn't just something I valued, it was how I survived this family. Showing up before the chaos meant I had some semblance of control, or at least enough time to carve out a corner of peace before everything unraveled. I carried in my canvas tote, packed with my utensils, my grandmother's stained recipe cards, and that one ridiculous turkey-shaped gravy boat Araminta always rolled her eyes at. My key still worked, which, given the recent patterns, felt like a small miracle. I stepped inside and stopped cold. The living room was unfamiliar. Gone were the muted earth tones, the chunky knit throws I'd collected over years of after-holiday sales. In their place were sleek beige sofas, mirrored accents, and oversized art prints featuring generic phrases like "manifest joy" and "own your light." The signature in the corner of one, AA, Araminta's initials. I blinked, trying to center myself. Maybe Mom decided to do a refresh. Maybe Araminta just helped her decorate. But then I noticed something else. There were no photos of me. None on the mantle, none on the gallery wall we'd created together the year I moved in. The entire place looked like it had been wiped of any trace of my life here. Still, I told myself to breathe. This wasn't the time to overreact. I was here early. I could talk to Mom, reset expectations, help with the meal, keep the peace. I started up the stairs with my bag, the familiar creak of the third step oddly comforting. But that comfort evaporated the moment I reached the top and saw my bedroom door ajar. The nameplate was gone. Inside, my bed had been replaced by a cat tower, 2 plush beds, and a dresser that read Araminta's Guest Lounge in bold silver lettering. The rug was pink. The curtains were different. A sign above the window said, "Meow lives here." My belongings, pushed into the hallway in 3 mismatched storage bins. It was like walking into someone else's Airbnb. I stood in the doorway, frozen. Behind me, Mom's voice floated up the stairs. "Oh, good, you're here." I turned slowly. "Hi," I said evenly. "Did something happen to my room?" She barely flinched. "Oh, sweetheart, we needed a more flexible space. With Araminta bringing her friends and the pets, we thought this would work better for everyone. You understand, right?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. My chest burned with a mixture of disbelief and something colder. Not anger, not yet, but the awareness that I had been repositioned, without notice, without conversation. I nodded once. Sure. Later that afternoon, while helping organize the name cards for the big dinner, I hoped to find a sliver of grounding, a way to reassert some presence, I told myself I could still be part of this, still make it work. I found the seating cards stacked on the counter, delicate calligraphy on ivory paper. As I flipped through them, I searched for my name. Amelia, kitchen support. I blinked. Amelia. My name is Ayala. At first I thought it was a typo, but then I saw every other name was correct. Araminta, Dad, Aunt Alara, even the second cousins I didn't remember. Just mine. Altered. When I held it up, Araminta breezed in wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. She laughed lightly when she saw my face. Oh, that. I thought you liked helping near the kitchen. It's your thing, right? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say my thing was leading corporate audits and managing seven-figure portfolios, not scraping gravy off bone china. But instead I said, sure, it's fine. I didn't mean it, and we both knew it. By evening, neighbors and early arrivals had started filtering in. The woman from down the street, who always smelled like eucalyptus and spoke in questions, walked in and exclaimed, "Wow, Araminta really made this place shine. This must be her house, right?" No one corrected her. Not Mom, not Dad, who was busy arranging wine bottles by region, not even Araminta, who stood there smiling like she'd been crowned. I tried to laugh along, but it caught in my throat. If you laugh long enough, you forget what your real voice sounds like. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. I typed, "Erasure doesn't start with big moments. It begins with being skipped over." I added another line, "And it always comes dressed as something polite." That night, after the kitchen was spotless and the guests had dispersed, I sat alone in the den. The room still smelled like roasted squash and candles. I stared at the walls. "You don't lose a home all at once," I whispered. "It disappears drawer by drawer, memory by memory." America has this obsession with space, real estate, possession. But in families like mine, ownership doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. It means footing the bill while someone else picks the curtains. I remembered a quote by Toni Morrison. "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." And suddenly, I realized I wasn't just being erased. I was being replaced. That truth settled in like frost on a window. The next morning, Araminta floated into the kitchen with her usual performative elegance. She wore white. Her hair was curled. She looked like someone about to pose for a magazine spread. "I hope the seat near the oven isn't too hot for you," she said, sipping her wine. "I asked Mom to keep you close to the action." Her tone was syrupy, but I heard the blade underneath. I smiled back, tight. "Don't worry, I'm fireproof." She laughed and walked out. I turned to the sink and began scrubbing dishes. My movements sharper, more deliberate. This wasn't carelessness. It was a campaign. That night, as I was clearing out the last of the serving trays, I spotted a crumpled note in the trash. I smoothed it out. "Thank you for hosting, Araminta. This house suits you perfectly." No mention of me. Again, I lit a candle on the windowsill of what used to be my room. The scent of sandalwood filled the air. I stared at the flickering flame and said aloud, "I thought I was just being petty. Turns out, I was being replaced." I woke up to the sound of cabinets opening. For a moment, I thought I was back in my own rhythm, Thanksgiving prep mode, where I'd slip into the kitchen before sunrise, tie my apron tight, and move in silence with purpose. That morning, I moved slower. My hands felt heavier. I pulled open the drawer where Grandma's spice jars used to be, each one labeled in her neat cursive. Gone. In their place were clear, sterile containers marked Root Detox, Hormone Harmony, and Gut Love. Araminta's name printed on each one in that fake calligraphy she loved. I checked the cupboard for my apron, the faded maroon one I'd had since college, the one stained with years of pie fillings and gravy splashes. Missing. Instead, on the hook, hung a pristine beige apron embroidered with AA. I closed the drawer gently, then opened it again, slower, as if this time the world might reverse itself. But it didn't. No one in the house seemed surprised. No one commented. My mother brushed past me to get to the kettle. "Oh, good, you're up," she said, her voice breezy. "Do you want ginger tea? Araminta brought her own blend. I murmured something, probably, sure, though I don't remember tasting it. The house hadn't changed overnight. It had been shifting quietly, reshaping itself until I no longer recognized its bones, not taken by storm, but slowly, like erosion. Later that morning, while wiping down the granite counters that now gleamed too perfectly, I found myself back in a memory I hadn't invited. 5 years ago, summer. The air had been thick with disappointment after Dad's investment tanked and the mortgage teetered on default. "We're going to lose the house," he'd said. "Unless—" They looked at me with the kind of desperation that makes even reasonable people reckless. I didn't hesitate. I offered my credit, my savings. I co-signed the refinance. I didn't ask for anything back. Then the roof caved in, literally. And I paid to have it replaced. The papers were in my name, the work was on my back, but somehow, Araminta became the face of it all. "I wasn't just the one who lived here," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "I was the one who kept the roof from collapsing. Literally." Nobody ever brought it up again. In the pantry, I looked for the stuffing ingredients, the recipe I had memorized since I was 15. The one Grandma said was the one dish that never changes. The spices were gone. The bread cubes, replaced by something gluten-free and vacuum-sealed. I turned around just as Mom walked in holding a bag of quinoa. "We're trying something different this year," she said, not looking at me. "Valora has a gluten sensitivity now. Araminta thought we'd simplify the menu." My throat tightened. But the stuffing— Before I could finish, Dad entered mid-scroll on his phone. "Just go with the flow, honey. This year's different. Yes, different." I nodded, but something inside me shifted, a pressure valve clicking. It didn't release anything. It just stopped holding the weight. After breakfast, I walked the house. Each room had become a monument to Araminta's brand. Crystals arranged just so, framed photos of her at retreats, diplomas from coaching programs, slogans like "Elevate your inner light," hanging where family portraits used to be. I opened the cupboard above the fridge. One mug left, a cheap white one with extra scribbled in fading marker. I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. New entry. Things they took without asking. I wrote down the spice drawer, the apron, the stuffing recipe, the photo wall, the mugs. Then I added another column. Who was there? Who saw? Who said nothing? Later that afternoon, we sat for coffee. Me, Mom, and Dad. No one else. I thought maybe I could try again. Just point things out. Without conflict. "I couldn't find my apron this morning," I began carefully. "Also, the stuffing." Mom smiled without looking up from her tea. "Aren't you glad you're getting to relax this year? No pressure." Dad checked his phone. "Mom," I tried again, softer. "You moved the nail I used to hang my picture." They didn't even blink. There's a saying in this country, "Your house is your castle." But what if the castle you paid for decides you don't get a key? I sat with that thought as I folded laundry in the basement. Memories drifted in, not just of this house, but of every moment I held my tongue to keep harmony. Every time I swallowed hurt for the sake of family. Every check I wrote without being asked. Every time someone said, "Well, you're the strong one." Nora Ephron once said, "Your parents weren't always wrong, but they weren't always right either." I used to confuse silence with peace. I thought holding it all together meant I belonged. But this wasn't a home anymore. It was a showroom for Araminta's success. That evening, I sat at the kitchen island flipping through the final version of the menu card. It had been professionally printed, laminated, Araminta's name at the top. Araminta's harvest soup. Araminta's mindful greens. Araminta's pumpkin pie. There was nothing of me, not even a note that I'd prepped the cranberry sauce, not a single mention. I folded the menu gently and slipped it into my folder labeled Evidence. Then I whispered to no one, but fully to myself. They may have erased my name from the menu, but I still hold the deed to the kitchen, Thanksgiving morning started before the sun even considered rising. I slipped out of bed on instinct, bare feet brushing the cold hardwood floor, brain still halfway in a dream about a house that didn't look like mine anymore, because it wasn't. The kitchen was already humming with the quiet rhythm of expectation. I reached for the coffee pot, but paused when my eyes landed on a neatly typed sheet taped to the refrigerator. My name was at the top, bolded. The list beneath read like a work shift. Clean prep area, refill wine bar, preheat oven, restock serving trays, refresh hand towels in guest bath. Araminta's name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. She was likely still upstairs, curled beneath her overpriced throw blanket, dreaming of centerpieces and hashtags. I reread the list, line by line, letting the absurdity soak in. I had offered help for years. Now it was being assigned to me like I was staff. I obeyed, at least for now. I scrubbed counters, organized platters, restocked the fridge. I did it because it needed doing, not because I felt invited to do it. I watched as people began to trickle in, family, extended family, family friends. Some I hadn't seen in years, some I barely remembered. They smiled as they passed me in the kitchen, murmured hellos, never stopped to ask how I was. One woman, a friend of Mom's from her garden club, leaned over the island and whispered, "Can I grab a few extra forks? You're catering, right?" Before I could reply, my cousin, Jason, walked by and snapped, "Hey, I think we're out of wine. You're in charge of refills, right?" I smiled, nodded, refilled. Inside, something coiled tight. No one asked what I'd been working on this year. No one asked about my consulting firm or the fact that I'd been promoted. No one asked where I lived, even though we were standing in my house. They barely said my name. Araminta was introduced no less than 3 times as the woman of the house. The final straw, a cheese platter I had arranged, meticulously, was placed at the center of the main table. Araminta swiped a grape from the edge, turned to a small group and said, "You guys know I've always been the hostess type. I love creating these kinds of spaces." I stepped back, my smile stretched thin, brittle. She wasn't creating space. She was taking it. Later, I pulled Mom aside in the hallway while everyone else was toasting. Why is everyone acting like Araminta owns this house? I kept my tone even, though my palms itched to gesture. Mom's lips tightened. "Ayala, please, don't start." "I'm not starting," I said. "I'm asking." "We have guests," she said, almost hissing. "Let's not make this about you." I blinked. "It's not about me. It's about honesty." She leaned in closer. Truth isn't always helpful in moments like this. My jaw locked. That line? That line had been her favorite weapon for years. It wasn't just gaslighting. It was a message. Keep your head down, your voice low, and your presence minimal. She walked away before I could respond. Back in the living room, I stood in the doorway watching as Araminta raised a glass, effortlessly commanding the attention of every adult in the room. Dad laughed too loudly at her story about her recent trip to Sedona, the same trip she'd canceled a client session to attend. An older cousin clutched her arm and gushed about how proud the family must be. No one noticed I wasn't sitting at the table. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, not a single "Where are you?" or "Are you okay?" When someone is lifted, I thought, it often means someone else was lowered to make space. I turned back into the kitchen. The turkey had just finished roasting. I set the final platter gently onto the warming tray, then unfastened my apron. I folded it into a square, placed it on the counter. Then I walked, slow and quiet, back upstairs, into the room that used to be mine. Now it was the cat lounge. I sat on the floor beside the window, cross-legged, and opened my phone. I scrolled through my notes app until I reached the file I'd renamed just hours earlier. Documented disrespect. I tapped it open, read every line. Each entry had a timestamp, a location, a brief description, the apron, the spice jars, the name card, the dinner invitation, the toast. I added one more. Thanksgiving Day, 9:15 a.m. Assigned task list, referred to as staff. I scrolled again, highlighting, categorizing. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, but because I was preparing, like someone sharpening a knife. "This isn't going to end the way they think it will," I said to the room. No one heard me. But that didn't matter. I pulled out the folder I'd kept buried in my briefcase. Inside were receipts, emails, tax documents, property records. The last property tax bill, paid 2 months ago, had one name on it, mine. "Clear is kind," I muttered, quoting Brené Brown. "Unclear is unkind." If no one else was going to bring clarity to this family fiction, I would, but not yet. I planned to stay quiet, for now. Only this time, my silence wasn't about politeness. It was the wait before the swing. Just before dinner began, I stood in the hallway, phone in hand. I opened the family group chat. Typed, "There's something I need to say tonight." My thumb hovered over the send button. I stared at it. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Then I backspaced every word. They wouldn't see it coming, but I'd make sure they heard it. I placed the last centerpiece, a mess of eucalyptus and dried oranges Araminta had insisted was elevated, on the far end of the table and stepped back. The dining room buzzed with voices, silverware, camera flashes, but even with the noise, the tension was a living thing, thick and clinging to the corners of the room. The table was arranged for 12. Araminta sat at the head, naturally. The camera had been angled to catch her best side, capturing her raising glasses and tossing back her head in laughter. Everyone else had a spot that framed well for the group photo. Everyone but me. I stood staring at my assigned seat, far corner, nearest the swinging kitchen door. From that angle, I wouldn't be visible in any photo. The chair was plain, no cushion, and slightly turned away from the table. It looked like it had been pulled from the back porch and forgotten. I shifted it slightly, not to protest, but for comfort. My father, walking by with a tray of deviled eggs, paused. "Leave it as it is, Ayala. We're trying to keep everything symmetrical." I let go of the chair. Araminta walked past me, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeves. "That's where Grandma used to sit when she started forgetting things, remember?" Her voice was breezy. "It's the calmest spot, less overwhelming." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The message had already been sent. By the time we sat down to eat, I'd decided to stay silent. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted them to speak first, to let them reveal who they thought I was. Halfway through the turkey, during a lull in conversation, I tried to contribute. "I was thinking we could—" My father raised a hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Let's not act like you've always been involved," he said, his tone dismissive but oddly light, like he was stating a fact. "You've always been on the fringe." It landed harder than a shout. I looked at him, expecting a quick retraction, some signal that he'd meant it differently. But then Mom chimed in, gentle as ever. "Some people are just meant to observe." And just like that, the floor shifted under my chair. No one defended me. Not an aunt, not a cousin, not even the friend I'd picked up from the airport the day before. Their silence was confirmation, agreement wrapped in politeness. I stared at my plate. The green beans looked gray. The mashed potatoes congealed at the edges. The cranberry sauce had bled into everything else, like a quiet wound. I had paid the last property tax bill. I'd covered the HVAC repair last winter. I funded the refinanced mortgage when the family was 2 months from default. I rebuilt the kitchen they were eating in. But they rebuilt the story without me. Araminta threw her head back and laughed at something no one said. My aunt, across the table, met my eyes for half a second and then looked down at her water glass. That felt like the real toast, no champagne required. A few minutes later, a woman I didn't recognize came up to me, late 40s, long scarf, East Coast accent. She smiled warmly and said, "Hi, could I trouble you for some extra napkins? You're with the catering team, right?" I didn't flinch. "No," I said calmly. "I own this house." She blinked. "Oh, sorry, I just assumed. I thought you were Araminta's roommate or something." I smiled again, more tightly this time. "No," I said. "You assumed right." I excused myself to the bathroom. Inside, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the tub, took 3 slow breaths, and pulled out my phone. I opened the folder labeled Documented Disrespect and added a new entry. Thanksgiving Day, 2:11 p.m. Mistaken for catering staff. In my own home. I turned on the voice recorder. This is erasure in real time, I said. The kind you can't prove, the kind that rewrites you while you're still in the room. I scrolled through the file. Receipts for plumbing, invoices for repairs, emails confirming permits, all in my name. They can erase my presence, I whispered, but they can't delete my signature. By the time I returned to the table, dessert was being served. Someone, probably Uncle Mike, raised a glass. To Araminta, he said, the heart of this home. Mom smiled, her eyes wet. We're so lucky to have her. Especially in this house she's made into something so warm. I picked up my glass, considered raising it, and then set it back down. No one noticed. My chair scraped gently as I stood and left the room. I didn't storm. I didn't slam anything. I was just done. As I stepped into the hallway, Araminta called after me. You forgot your plate! I paused, turned my head just enough for her to hear. No, I said. You took it a long time ago. I walked upstairs. Back in the cat lounge, formerly my bedroom, I opened my laptop. I clicked open the file I'd been building for months and renamed it from Evidence to Restoration. Then I drafted an email to my lawyer. Subject line, Notice of Intent. Final line, if they won't give me a seat, I'll take back the floor. By the time dessert was cleared and second glasses of wine were poured, I could feel the walls shift, not literally, but in energy, the way dogs know when thunder's coming. Araminta stood at the end of the table, tapping her fork gently against her wine glass like she was about to present a thesis instead of a toast. I just want to say how grateful I am to be surrounded by love, growth, and the legacy we've built together, she said, lifting her glass like she was accepting an award. And I have a little surprise. From under the table, Dad pulled out a blue folder. My stomach nodded. This has been in the works for a while, he said with a grin, holding the folder like it was a trophy. We've finally made it official. This house is now fully in Araminta's name. I didn't move. He flipped the folder open for show. Signed and sealed. It's hers. Mom added, giggling like a girl in love. We've erased the past, haven't we? That word again. Erased. I stared at my wine glass, mid-air, still half full. I couldn't remember lifting it. I didn't lower it. Everyone around the table clapped. Araminta bowed slightly, as if crowned. It was the loudest moment of my life, and somehow, I heard nothing. Their cheers washed over me, hollow and strange, like wind moving through a church after hours. I scanned the faces, cousins, aunts, a neighbor from across the street. Every face blurred as they laughed, each movement too sharp in my peripheral vision. Erased. Not symbolically, not emotionally. Actually. I turned to my cousin, Elise. She caught my eye and gave a quick shake of her head, small, sharp. The universal signal for don't make this messy. But it already was. I left the room quietly, stepping into the hallway to catch my breath. My feet moved on instinct, but they knew where to go, right to the family photo wall. The frames had been rearranged. The photos were new. A freshly printed 16 by 20 from last Christmas, one I wasn't in, took center stage. To its left was Araminta's coaching certificate, framed in gold. Below that, her graduation photo. And next to it, a black and white candid of Mom and Araminta in the kitchen, laughing. The photo of me with Grandma on her last Thanksgiving, gone. The picture of me holding the baby cousin who now ran to Araminta first, also gone. I stood there for a long time, longer than I meant to, before whispering, they didn't just sign her name on a deed, they scrubbed me off the wall. I took a photo of it, added it to the folder. Then I walked back upstairs, to the room that used to be mine. The sign on the door read Pet Lounge. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat down on the floor, cross-legged, laptop resting on my thighs. My fingers opened the file I'd been building. I scrolled to the confirmation email from the county recorder, dated last week. It clearly stated that the house title remained in my name. There had been no recorded transfer. Something didn't match. I opened the property ID database. navigated to the records page, scanned the latest activity. No official change. So if they had signed something, it wasn't filed. Not yet. Probably staged to look real, timed for maximum humiliation, but not actually done. If they're going to stage a coronation, I murmured, I'll deliver the audit. I started gathering everything, scan after scan, photos, receipts, the appraisal letter I'd received when I refinanced, emails from my banker. A knock came. I didn't answer right away. Then Aunt Alara's voice. It's me, just me. I stood and opened the door. She stepped in holding a small white envelope. I didn't know they'd do it like that, she said softly. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a note. Property transfer, effective Monday. The signature was Dad's, not notarized, just scribbled. So it's not filed? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. I overheard them say they'd take care of it first thing Monday. I sat back down on the floor. They wanted the applause before they earned the crown. Alara knelt beside me. If you're going to fight, this is your moment. I nodded slowly. The room didn't feel like mine anymore, but the documents said otherwise. My breath deepened. I felt the fire, the quiet one, ignite again. After she left, I didn't go back downstairs. Instead, I made my way to the laundry room, one of the few places untouched by Araminta's influence. I sat on the cool tile floor, plugged my phone into the wall outlet, and started uploading every document I'd collected to a secure cloud folder. I labeled the inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that weren't witnessed, the dinner speech filmed but tied to nothing legal. Truth doesn't need applause, I whispered. It just needs documentation. I called Sabine. No answer. Voicemail. Sabine, it's time, I said. Not urgent, but important. You know what to do. Red file. I ended the call, then leaned against the dryer, eyes closed. Time of death, I whispered. Today at dinner, for their version of the story. Back upstairs, I sat at my laptop again, opened the folder labeled Restoration, renamed it Exhibit A, Estate Erasure, drafted a blind email, subject, red file, activate only if I say go, attached every document, every photo, every screenshot. I reread the subject line twice, then hovered over send, just long enough to let the weight settle. They served betrayal as the main course, I typed into the email body. I'm ready to serve notice. Dessert plates clinked gently, spoons tapping against ceramic in practiced rhythms. Around the table, voices buzzed with post-meal contentment, some louder than others, all circling Araminta like moths to a porch light. I stood at the buffet, setting down the final bottle of Cabernet next to the overfilled decanter, and walked away without a word. Nobody noticed I didn't pour myself a glass. From the living room, laughter rolled back like waves brushing against hardwood. I paused in the hallway, scanned the scene. Faces flushed with wine, hands gesturing wide, shoes kicked off under chairs. They were all full. Full of pie, full of themselves, full of someone else's story. If they thought the meal was over, they hadn't read the menu I'd been building. I stepped over to the TV console, slid the flash drive into the side port, and grabbed the remote. The screen blinked to life. Before we all head home, I said, not raising my voice but letting it travel, I'd like to share a little something I've been working on. The room dimmed as conversations fell into hush. Click. The video began. An image of the roof last winter, buckled and soaked. Overlaid was the invoice, $12,600. Paid in full. My name clearly printed on the line beneath. Client signature, Ayala Rowan. The next slide, a scanned email thread between me and the city permitting office regarding the heating repair. Another, screenshots of bank transfers linked directly to property taxes. Then the voice recording started. My mother's voice. We can lean on Ayala a bit longer. She won't fight us on it. My father's. Just get her to co-sign again. She doesn't want to be the bad guy. Every line, date-stamped, verified. I stood still as the footage played behind me. While some of you were sipping wine, I said calmly, I was funding the foundation. Forks froze mid-air. Nobody moved. Sophrona shifted in her chair, her hands wringing her napkin into a thin rope. She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, but I raised one hand, slow and steady. Not now, Mom. The silence became heavy, pressing down on shoulders and foreheads. My father leaned forward. This isn't the place for— You made it the place, I replied. When you signed something that doesn't belong to you, at this very table. A few relatives turned toward me, others toward Araminta. Jason whispered to Elise, Is this for real? Aunt Clara wiped under her eyes with a cocktail napkin. I had no idea, she murmured. Of course not, I said. Because truth doesn't make good theater. But I'm done playing stagehand. Araminta stood abruptly. Her voice quivered, but sharp edges poked through. You think you're better than me because you pay for things? Her tone was louder than it needed to be. Her glass clinked against the table. Then it slipped. She added, It was Mom's idea to put it in my name. She said you were too cold to be the face of the family. A collective inhale pulled the room tighter. Eyes shifted to Sophrona. Her lips pinched, nostrils flared, but she didn't deny it. She didn't say a word. I didn't gloat, didn't even smile. I just said, And there it is. From the bench near the bay window, I pulled a stack of folders. One by one, I handed them out. These are for anyone who wants clarity. I don't expect support. I expect awareness. Each folder contained copies of the deed, my repair invoices, the property record. I had highlighted key lines, included annotations, and bound them with color-coded tabs. Look at the documents, I said, not the drama. I quoted Ruth Bader Ginsburg, letting the words settle. Real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time, and sometimes in one clean slap. My voice didn't tremble, my hands didn't fidget. I've already filed a pre-dispute claim with the county. The signature is meaningless unless it's recorded. And it's not. That part struck. My parents went pale. Around the room, the tone shifted, slowly, quietly. Uncle Peter adjusted his tie. If I'd known, I wouldn't have signed the card the way I did. Someone from the far end of the room, one of Araminta's friends, stood and slipped out the back. Aunt Alara moved closer to me, resting a hand on my shoulder. I always believed you'd rise, she whispered. Even when you were quiet. Araminta's voice pierced again, higher this time, nearly cracking. This was supposed to be a celebration. I turned toward her fully, measured and even. It still is, for truth. The table that had once been her stage was no longer hers. It was mine now, and not because I demanded it, but because I reclaimed it. I stepped toward the television, grabbed the remote, and hit pause. The screen froze on the final slide. Pending legal transfer. Ownership disputed. I turned to the room. They thought I came unarmed, I said, but I brought paper and proof. The living room had been rearranged, again. Dessert had been moved to the coffee table. Candles flickered from every corner like spotlights, and Araminta had positioned herself dead center on the couch, where the lighting hit her just right. She queued up a playlist of soft instrumental piano, poured herself herbal tea into one of her Healing Happens Here mugs, and announced, Let's have a reflection circle. I chose a seat in the far corner, deliberately out of frame. I wasn't there to perform. I sipped my own tea, unsweetened, and opened my phone. My folder of documents, scanned, time-stamped, cross-referenced, sat quietly in a password-protected file I could access in seconds. The chatter faded as I watched the people I once called family melt into their performances, smiles rehearsed, words safe. I wasn't nervous anymore, just clear. They turned this room into a stage, but I was here to direct the final act. Before I could say a word, someone else did. Aunt Alara stood beside the TV, phone in hand. There's something all of you should know, she said, her voice unshaking. Heads turned. Spoons paused midair. She tapped play. My mother's voice filled the room. We're giving the house to Araminta. Ayala won't resist. She never does. It wasn't a whisper or a joke. It was planned, cold and certain. Silence hit like a wave, a few gasps, a fork clinking against porcelain. My mother's face flushed with anger, not shame. Alara didn't flinch. She just locked eyes with her sister and held steady. So it was planned, someone muttered near the back. I didn't thank Alara. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth wasn't kindness. It was currency. The next blow came smaller, sharper. My niece, giggling with a cousin, held up a place card. Why does this say Olive? My heart skipped, not from surprise, but from exhaustion. Araminta laughed lightly. The printer must have auto-corrected it. Weird, right? I stood. Walked to the table, picked up the card and looked at it a long moment. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my business card, real name, real title, and placed it next to the fake one. In case anyone forgot who pays the mortgage in this house, I said. Someone coughed. Araminta cleared her throat. Okay, everyone, let's reset the energy. How about we each share what we're grateful for? Around the room, the gratitude circle began. Family. Good health. Community. Polite answers. Nothing risky. My turn came. I'm grateful for evidence, I said. It doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. And it doesn't change names. The words landed hard. A child's voice piped up. Aunt Ayala, why did you change your name to Olive? I looked across the room. Araminta froze. Her cheeks flushed. Sophrona stood, stepping into the silence like she was used to rescuing her daughter. She meant no harm. You always take things too personally. I turned to her, my tone calm but pointed. I take things seriously. That's why this house didn't fall apart under your watch. Dad spoke next, his voice strained. Can we just be a family again? No, I said. Because we were never a family. We were a system. And I'm no longer a cog. The sentence sucked the air out of the room. Even Araminta sat down. No one clapped. No one objected. Just silence, which, for the first time, wasn't erasure. It was acknowledgement. I stood again, this time not for show. I faced Araminta and Sophrona directly. The papers aren't binding. The timeline isn't final. And the story, it isn't yours to write. I reached for the plate still on the coffee table, stacked with empty cups. Now that we've shared our truths, I said, maybe we can clear the rest. People began moving, quietly, without instruction. A few aunts collected used napkins. My cousin Jason picked up a tray. It wasn't celebration. It was shift. A turning. As I walked toward the hallway, someone near the staircase whispered, "You handled that like a trial." I paused, glanced back. "That wasn't the trial," I said softly. "That was the deposition. And the verdict? It's coming soon." The house didn't go quiet, it just held its breath. Guests filed out with tight smiles and shallow hugs, murmuring excuses like early morning flight or too much pie. I didn't walk them out. I didn't need to. The silence trailing behind them was more honest than any goodbye. Once the last door clicked shut, I turned back into the kitchen. Half-empty wine glasses dotted the counters, lipstick smudged on rims, dessert plates balanced precariously in the sink, some still holding half-eaten pie. Not a single person had offered to help clean up. As usual, I didn't move out of duty. I moved because movement was clarity. I started clearing, stacking, rinsing. With each dish, I exhaled more of them. What they took, what they assumed. They came to eat, I whispered, rinsing off a plate, not to clean the mess they made, figuratively or otherwise. This wasn't surrender. This was reset. Back at my laptop, sorting through payment alerts and emails, something flagged my attention. An auto notification for a $5,000 withdrawal from the joint house emergency account. I hadn't approved anything recently. I clicked through, a cosmetic clinic. Payment labeled, corrective wellness procedure. My stomach dropped. Araminta. I called the bank. The account apparently still had joint access for Mom and me, something I had forgotten to update after the last refinance. I'd trusted them to treat the funds with integrity. Stupid. It was processed 2 weeks ago, the banker explained. Authorized by Ms. Rowan, Sophrona Rowan. Of course it was. My mother had used my money to fund Araminta's transformation. And no one had thought to tell me, not even a heads up, just subtraction. I didn't just fund their dinners, I murmured. I funded their denial. And the house wasn't just a stage anymore. It had become a place where erasure was financed in plain sight. Walking into the family room for a moment of breath, I noticed the altar had vanished. Where there had once been a table of old black and white photos, a framed wedding picture of my grandparents, a candle that flickered each Thanksgiving. There was now a Himalayan salt lamp, plastic ferns, and a framed quote, "Create your future, forget your past." I stood there, completely still. I opened the side cabinet and rummaged through the clutter. Behind 2 bottles of cheap Merlot, I found the photos, not broken, but bent, crumpled slightly at the edges. I pulled them out and laid them on the table, brushing off dust. One was of Grandma in her apron, another of Grandpa saluting the camera in front of his Navy truck. These weren't just images, they were anchors, and they had been stuffed away like out-of-season decorations. "You don't throw away legacy," I said softly, "not without becoming a ghost yourself." Back upstairs, I scrolled social media out of habit, needing distance. That's when I saw it. Araminta's post. "Hardest day of my life. Betrayed at the table I set for my family. All I've done is try to love them." Family first, #Grace under fire. The comment section bloomed instantly. "You're the strong one, Minta. Keep shining. Haters don't win. You did your best. That's all anyone can do." I stared at it for a full minute before I laughed. Once, short and sharp. "There it is," I whispered. "The brand of victimhood, made for Instagram." I took screenshots, not to retaliate online. That wasn't my game. But manipulation wears many masks, and sometimes evidence is nothing more than knowing who someone chooses to be when no one is looking. I didn't comment, didn't message, didn't rage. My reply would come in another language, paperwork, not pixels. Back in the kitchen, Roxalana, Dad, walked in. He stood there silently for a while, leaning against the counter. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said finally. I didn't respond. "It was never about not loving you," he added. "It's just..." Araminta breaks. "You bend." I turned toward him, voice even. "That's the problem. I've always bent, but now I'm learning to stand." He sighed. "A real one. The kind that means you hear something but still won't change." "I'm sorry," he offered, and it sounded halfway honest, not deep enough to rebuild, but far enough from denial to not dismiss entirely. They didn't hate me, I thought later. They just preferred the one who never challenged them. I didn't forgive him, but I let him leave without malice. As the clock edged toward 1 a.m., I stayed up, assembling everything. I renamed the archive folder on my desktop. Family Revisionism, Real and Recorded. Inside it, I organized everything into subfolders, one for financial documents, one for emails, one for screenshots, another for the altar photos. I highlighted inconsistencies, labeled dates, indexed entries. Then I uploaded the folder to the cloud and sent the secure link to Sabine. The subject line read, Phase 2, Narrative Retention. History isn't what happened. It's what's documented. Before going to bed, I stood in the dining room, now dim and cold. The place card labeled Olive still sat at my chair. It hadn't even curled at the edges, like it was proud of its mistake. I picked it up, tore it once, then again, tossed it in the trash. In its place, I laid my actual business card. Clean, matte, centered with my name in embossed silver. Ayala Rowan, Principal Consultant. This house may no longer be sacred, but I've made truth my sanctuary. The morning after, I woke before anyone else. Not out of stress or obligation, just clarity. I wrapped myself in the old wool cardigan I kept tucked behind the coat rack and stepped out onto the porch. The sun had just started bleeding color into the sky, a slow reveal like someone easing into honesty. My coffee was strong, my spine straight. For once, there was no tremble in my fingers, no doubt clawing at the back of my throat, just breath and decision. They served the betrayal hot, I murmured, but I serve consequences cold and with a receipt. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder. Exhibit A, Estate Erasure. Every line item reviewed again, every invoice double-checked, dates verified, names highlighted. If the truth had a body, this was it. Outlined, stamped, signed, stored. Today, I would act. The call to Sabine went through on the first ring. "Tell me we're clean," I said. "We're clean," she replied. "No record of title transfer." "The no transfer hold you filed last week locked it. They celebrated a ceremony, not a contract. So the house was still mine, legally, fully, irrefutably." "Good," I said. "Then let them keep decorating a house that doesn't belong to them." We ended the call. I smiled, not from satisfaction, but from resolve. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on the blank email, waiting. This wasn't going to be a letter dripping with resentment. It wasn't even personal. It was documentation, structure, the beginning of an exit that didn't ask for applause. Subject line, notice served, 12/1. "Please find attached my formal 30-day notice for the sale and rent-back agreement," I typed. "Per our previous conversations and legal advisement, I will be vacating the property no later than January 1st. Effective immediately, all changes to the home, financial or structural, must be cleared through legal counsel." I attached scanned copies of the pre-dispute filing, the title history, and a summary letter from Sabine. I ended the message simply. This is not retaliation, it's restoration. I hit save, but didn't send yet. There was still time for them to see it the right way. But 15 minutes later, Dad called. I declined the call. Mom's voicemail followed. Her voice cracked, thick with manipulated emotion. "You've gone too far. This is family." Then a text from Araminta. Short, sharp. "This isn't what family does." I typed a reply. "Then you should have treated me like family when it mattered." But I didn't send it. I forwarded it to Sabine instead, for the record. Justice isn't revenge. It's choosing truth over comfort. I packed in silence that morning, one room at a time. No rush, no drama, just steady movement. My books went into organized piles. Framed certificates wrapped carefully, clothing folded, not thrown. I took only what was mine and didn't look back at what was never offered freely. In the hallway closet, tucked behind winter scarves, I found the photo. It was me, 9 years younger, standing on the porch holding a manila envelope and a silver key, the day I signed the mortgage. I remembered the weight of the moment, the absurd mix of fear and pride in my stomach. The way the realtor surprised me with the photo and said, "This is the face of someone who did it alone." I slid the photo into a padded envelope, labeled it in pen, proof of possibility. Michelle Obama once said, "When they go low, we go high, but sometimes we go legal." Amen to that. Around mid-afternoon, as I closed the final box, the doorbell rang. Through the window, Sophrona and Araminta. No call, no warning. I opened the door, didn't invite them in. Sophrona spoke first, eyes red, voice shaky. "We didn't know how far you'd go." "You never asked how far you'd already pushed me," I said. Araminta looked thinner than usual, less polished. She didn't speak right away, then finally, "You're really doing this?" "I already did." I didn't slam the door, I just closed it. Later that evening, I sat at the table one last time, my laptop in front of me, one finger poised over the mouse. I opened the housing board's online complaint portal, attached all files, input every required detail, clicked submit. "The house may still be full of their noise," I whispered, "but the deed and the last word is mine." Boxes lined the hallway like quiet soldiers. I wasn't rushing anymore. Every fold of bubble wrap, every strip of labeled tape, deliberate. I no longer moved like someone trying to prove she had the right to exist in this space. I was past that. This house had taught me how to carry the weight of others. Now, I chose what I carried out. I left behind what no longer belonged to me. A chipped vase from a trip I never enjoyed. The apron that had somehow become everyone's but mine. Books no one read but insisted on keeping. They could have all that. I wasn't in the business of dragging dead weight. Let them keep the clutter. I'm taking my clarity. I walked from room to room, touching the walls softly with my fingertips. It felt less like goodbye and more like closing tabs I'd left open too long. The living room still smelled faintly of rosemary from last year's Thanksgiving. I stood where I'd once danced alone after signing the mortgage. I lingered near the kitchen, where I'd cried into pasta sauce the night my bonus didn't come through. None of these moments were in frames, but they were mine. I pulled my journal from the box marked First Open, flipped to a blank page and wrote, "This happened, even if they won't say it, even if I never did until now. Truth doesn't need an audience, it only needs to be acknowledged." Later that morning, an email pinged into my inbox. Araminta. Of course. The subject line read, "Hope we can talk." The body of the message was perfectly polished. "I'm sorry things got so messy. Maybe we can talk someday when it's not so raw. I never meant to hurt you." No ownership, no apology for what actually happened, just enough language to look remorseful. Just in case anyone asked, I read it twice, then archived it. I drafted a reply. "I hope someday you'll know what this really cost." But I didn't send it. Some replies deserve silence. Just after lunch, Aunt Ilara showed up with a paper bag full of muffins and a folding dolly. She wore a windbreaker that was too big and a determined expression I hadn't seen in her since Grandpa's funeral. "I came to work," she said, "not to talk." We packed in silence, then sat at the kitchen table with lukewarm tea. "You broke something," she said quietly, "but only what needed to be broken." I nodded. Sometimes clarity doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from completion. She looked at me and smiled. Not a big one, but real. We hugged. No words. In our family, that was a revolution. The last night, I didn't sleep in my bed. It had already been hauled off with the rest of my furniture. Instead, I rolled out a blanket in the center of the empty living room and lay there listening to the silence. No clicking heels upstairs, no forced laughter, no undercurrents, just quiet. I set alarms for the movers, checked the walkthrough checklist one last time. Everything was in order. Then I flipped through my notebook, landing on a quote I'd copied from Bell Hooks months ago. "Love and abuse cannot coexist." That line hit different now. I had chosen love, this time for myself, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night. The next morning, the movers arrived right on time. It took less than an hour. There wasn't much left to take, which was the point. I walked through each room once more, not for nostalgia, but for finality. I didn't whisper goodbye to the walls. They weren't mine anymore. At the door, I slid the keys into an envelope labeled in bold letters. Closing transfer. Final. I stood on the porch for a beat longer. Across the street, the family car sat parked. Curtains fluttered in the window. No one stepped out. "Goodbye," I said quietly. Not to this house, but to who I had to be inside it. I stepped off the porch and didn't look back. My new apartment was small, bright, and quiet. The walls were blank but full of possibility. The air smelled like fresh paint and lavender from the diffuser I'd already unpacked. I placed one item on the entry table before anything else, a photo in a wooden frame. Me, standing on the porch 9 years ago, holding the mortgage folder, smiling too big for my face. This time, I billed without asking to belong. The quiet in my apartment was unlike any silence I had ever known. Not the kind that followed arguments or hovered in tense rooms. This was different, full, not empty. The sun cast long golden lines across the hardwood floors, and the hum of morning traffic below felt almost musical. I watered the single plant on my windowsill and smiled without prompting. For the first time, silence wasn't loneliness. It was ownership. No doors slamming, no sharp glances, no silent corrections about how I held my coffee mug. Just space, and breath, and choice. Mid-morning, Sabine called. "It's official," she said. The complaint triggered a formal audit. I leaned against the counter, heart steady. What did they find? "The Thanksgiving deed transfer was invalid," she continued. "Filed improperly, forged dates, no witness. The housing board is flagging both your mother and sister for procedural misconduct, possible fines, county-level review." I didn't gloat. But I allowed myself a slow, quiet exhale. "And Araminta?" I asked. "Her business license is under review," Sabine added. multiple complaints of unethical representation. "Let the process run," I said, already in motion. As I hung up, I remembered something a therapist once told me. Sometimes the apology never comes, but the consequences do. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. The title bar blinked as I typed. Not the black sheep, just the boundaried one. I wrote about invisible labor, about the ways women carry things no one sees, and when they stop, they're labeled difficult. I included redacted receipts, screenshots. I layered truth with restraint. Then I hit publish. Within 24 hours, the post had made its way across dozens of women's groups. "I lived this," someone wrote. "You gave me words I didn't know I needed," another said. The comments filled faster than I could read them. There were no fireworks, just a quiet hum of recognition. Araminta tried to respond. A comment here, a cryptic Instagram story there. But every time she pushed, someone dropped a link, quoted a document, posted a screenshot. The court of public opinion was no longer hers. 2 days later, I took a walk, ended up on my old street, not by accident, but by closure. The house looked the same from the outside, too pristine, too polished. The garden gnome Araminta hated still sat by the front steps. Good, I didn't knock. I left an envelope on the porch, addressed simply, Sophrona and Roxalana. Inside was one sheet of paper, typed, titled, Inventory of Unreturned Emotional Labor. Underneath, I wrote, "You don't owe me anything, but don't ever pretend I owed you everything." I turned and walked away. A few blocks from home, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in familiar script. Inside it read, "You taught me that silence isn't noble when it protects injustice. I'm sorry I didn't speak up." Signed, Elise, my cousin, the one who'd looked away during that awful dinner. I didn't cry from hurt. I cried from recognition. Sometimes vindication doesn't roar. It whispers through someone else's regret. The next morning, I unlocked the back room of my apartment, the space I'd set aside for my photography business. I laid out the prints I'd held onto for years, ordered lighting, hung blackout curtains. Clients began trickling in. Women, mostly. Women who had lost something. Homes, families, sometimes just their own voices. I started mentoring a younger woman who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Scared, but smart. Quiet, but watching everything. Her name was Maya. She smiled like it cost her something. I taught her how to shoot light through shadows. She taught me how to be patient with the things I couldn't fix. Forgiveness isn't always granted. Sometimes, it's just giving up the hope that the past could be any different. Oprah said that. I wrote it on a sticky note above my desk. I didn't forgive them, but I released them. One day, maybe they'd do the same for me. In the center of my studio, I set up a new frame. Inside, a photo of me holding the original house key 9 years ago. Beneath it, the caption read, "Built, betrayed, reborn." This chapter didn't end with applause. It ended with authorship. And this time, the pen was mine.